more on this. We're joined by Antony Loewenstein, an independent journalist and the author of The Palestine Laboratory. He was based in occupied East Jerusalem between 2016 and 2020. Antony, thanks very much indeed for your time. How much significance do you attach to the ICJ hearings that are currently going on in The Hague?
Look, I wished I had more faith that it would make a difference. They're important in terms of establishing the illegality of what Israel is clearly doing, the intention of starving huge amounts of Palestinians. And in fact, if you read the Israeli press, which many in the Western press seemingly ignore, within the Israeli government itself, there is an acknowledgement and in fact a desire publicly to starve Palestinians. They don't hide that. They openly say so. Ironically, some in the Israeli military, the IDF, are aware that starving Palestinians is a bit of a bad look and also may mean that they're the possibility of being charged with the ICJ in years to come. So the short answer is those hearings are important to establish illegality formally. But as we saw months ago when Netanyahu and Gallant, the former defense minister, arrest warrants were put out for the ICC based on the starvation of Palestinians, what has happened? State after state after state has not just allowed those leaders to fly in, but in fact has welcomed them.
Yes, and there has been some discussion about Israel losing its membership or its status of the United Nations. Presumably that wouldn't happen without American support, and Americans would never support such a move. In fact, Donald Trump has essentially given unequivocal support to Benjamin Netanyahu since he took office.
Look, I don't see any real viable path in the short term for Israel to be kicked out of the UN. I think there is definite reasons why it should be, by the way. But in a practical sense, when you have the 5 leading global powers, I don't think really any of them would support that, frankly. China, Russia, the US, I just don't see that happening. I think what needs to happen is there needs to be far more coordination between non-Western states. You've seen the beginnings of that. There was a meeting at The Hague a few months ago to try to prosecute Israeli leaders and generals and soldiers who have been fighting in the genocide in Gaza. That needs to be stepped up. There needs to be actual tangible attempts to hold these people to account, which means trials. That means accountability. It does not mean talk anymore. We're 18 plus months into a genocide here. And I think one of the things that many Palestinians I speak to say, and I'm not Palestinian, but I'm Jewish, deeply opposed to what Israel is doing. What we've really seen in the last 18 months is a profound failure of international law. We talk about the importance of international law, and as someone who's written about it for years, I'm one of those people. But it needs to be put into effect. If you cannot hold leaders or generals or soldiers to account while a conflict is going, as opposed to potentially putting someone on trial when a conflict is over in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, assuming they're still alive, then what ultimately is the point of international law beyond history? And history is not irrelevant here, but it doesn't help Palestinians who are suffering gravely 24/7 in Gaza and frankly the West Bank now.
You'll have no doubt seen Antony Guterres' most recent comments, the head of the UN, suggesting that the time for a two-state solution was running out. Now, many observers would say that that is long gone. We're way past that. And Antony Guterres clearly has not been paying attention. What's your reaction?
I mean, seeing those comments are just so deeply embarrassing. Either the Secretary General doesn't know what's going on, which I don't think is the case. There is still this, if you speak to many European leaders, they will still say on the record that, yes, we believe in a two-state solution. We believe in recognizing Palestine. There's hopefully a pathway to a Jewish and a Palestinian state. What planet they're living on? If you speak to European officials privately, as I have many times over the years, they all say the same thing. There's no two-state solution. There's a one-state solution now. It's an apartheid state. There is no intention, and this is not just the Israeli government, this is frankly the majority of the Israeli Jewish population. They have no intention of separating the land or an equal Palestinian-Israeli state. And I think what needs to come, not just from a Secretary General, but from many other states, is to have an accountability for the lack of any kind of pathway for Palestinian state. Just finally on this point, there's talk about the Saudis still having a normalization deal with the Israelis. Something the Trump administration is pushing, the idea that if there is a so-called ceasefire or cessation of hostilities in Gaza, the Saudis are open to that kind of possibility, normalization, and a pathway towards two states. To which I would say, where are these people living? How? Where? With what political constituency? Without not just massive pressure, but economic pain and sanctions and boycotts, akin to what happened against apartheid South Africa decades ago, to when the outrages there. Israel and Israelis aren't going to suddenly agree to separating the land or giving up the roughly 800,000 settlers that now live in the West Bank. It's just delusional, and the Secretary General needs a reality check, and fast.
Antony, we have to leave it there. Pleasure to speak to you as always. Thanks for coming on the NewsHour.
Thank you.